Hey guys, it's Book of Katherine, and thank you for coming back to my channel. I'm so glad to have you with me. I am dressed up a little bit more today because I want you to see how seriously I'm taking this. So as you know that I have been reading more lately, and I ran into a book. I ran out of things to read because I haven't had books. And while waiting for another book from a friend, I ran across this book upstairs, and I will be adding this to my reading list. I ordered this book, The Tainted Source by John Laughland, The Undemocratic Origins of the European Idea. I ordered this book somewhere in my research last year, early on. It was upstairs, so it must have been a really long time ago. But if you've seen my video on why the UN doesn't want any borders, and I connect Nazism and the UN and the EU and the Global Compact all together with Nazism. And I work really, really hard to do that as I go through the video, but I connect all the dots in how they're doing it. But it turns out someone came before, and I thought someone must have had to figure this out before. There is someone who came before, and that would be John Laughland. I want you to hear what he has to say on the back of his book. An ideology is sweeping, this was written in 1997, by the way. An ideology is sweeping Europe and the world, which threatens democracy and the rule of law. The post-national ideology, which posits that the nation-states are no longer capable of running their own affairs in a modern, interdependent economy, confuses the constitution of a state with the power of its government, and ignores the importance of the sense of community essential to any democratic debate. And it goes through it, and then at the very end it says, post-national structures, multinational companies, region states, and supranational organizations such as the European Union are corrosive of liberal values to such an extent that John Laughland makes it devastatingly clear that the post-national ideology formed a crucial core of Nazi economic and political thinking. Like the European ideology of today, it was predicated on dissolving the nation state and the liberal order. I'll read that again. He makes it devastatingly clear that the post-national ideology, globalism, formed a crucial core of Nazi economic and political thinking. And this book doesn't go through green. This goes through a whole different set of the difference between democracy and socialism, and it goes through Nazism, and it goes through fascism and what they did, and how the UN was actually thought up by the Nazis and the fascists in Europe. Sorry, the EU, the UN and the EU. Both. And he even says that after the Europeans formed, he's like, you would be surprised, but they're not just thinking of the European continent. They're thinking of going international, global. And that's exactly what they've done. So I highly recommend this book, The Tainted Source by John Laughland. I remember getting it, and I knew I couldn't read at the time, and I'm glad I can read now, and I find it incredible that that's something I figured out in my research without ever having the chance to read it. I couldn't, you see how small that print is on the back? I could never gotten through it. I think that I got it because I found a site, and I've shared some of the quotes with you. I found some quotes in here, and I'm like, I actually know those quotes. And I think that what happened is I was sharing some quotes with you, and they were coming from books, and I saw this book quoted twice, and so I looked it up, and I ordered it, and I was just like, I can never get through it, and now I'm just like, oh my God. And it was so long ago, I had no idea what I was dealing with. I mean, I had no idea about green or SDGs or anything. So, and this doesn't talk about sustainable development goals, I don't think. So I haven't gotten that far in it. But it does go through Nazism and how Nazis and fascists and Joseph Goebbels go through the idea of a European Union and even a world order, and the ideas behind it, and why money was invented, why it was so important that they used money when they did the European Union, how important that was, why it's developed, why it's a sign of a liberal society, which means democracy, and why it's so important to keep, and why they want to move it out. And he goes through the history of it. But here are just some quotes that I think that you would enjoy. So, yeah, I think this is actually the quote that made me buy the book. It's from Chapter 2, Fascists and Federalists. I am convinced that in 50 years' time, people will no longer think in terms of countries. Joseph Goebbels, 1940. Right-hand man to Hitler. In 1940. In 1940, that's before the end of World War II, he said, I am convinced that in 50 years' time, people will no longer think in terms of countries. And every time you see an announcement now, all you hear is international community. Even Rod Rosenstein, he came and did an announcement, and he apologized to the international community, and then he apologized to Americans, and then he apologized to his president. It's truly terrifying, the things that are in here, but they are so, so important to know. So let me find you another quote. All right, EU. Nazis, Vichyites, Italian fascists, and others spent many of the war years, as they or their spiritual fathers had done in the 1930s, developing sophisticated programs for European economic and political integration. Nazis, Vichyites, Italian fascists, and others spent many of the war years, as they or their spiritual fathers had done in the 1930s, developing sophisticated programs for European economic and political integration. That was their plan all along, was for the EU to occur. That's why that map lined up. It wasn't an accident. Hitler's desire to establish a single political entity in the whole of Europe, his need to carry support in occupied countries, and indeed many of the central elements in Nazi philosophy, including a fascination with the planned economy, all combined, therefore, to produce what can only be described as a coherent body of Nazi pro-European thought. Enjoy that one. Germany and the Nazis were the ones that came up with the idea of a unified Europe. And we know no more about where that came from. Yeah, it turns out that was their plan after the axis of evil won. The axis of power. Axis of power. Dang, too many axes. Axis of evil. All right. Even Hitler, who was less interested in the European idea than his propaganda chief, Joseph Goebbels, or his foreign minister, expressed the view that a European system based on independent nation states was anarchic. In August 1941, he and Mussolini issued a joint communique, I can't read any of this, which said that the new European order, which would follow the Axis victory, should remove the causes which have led to European wars in the past. So it just should be united in the political as in the economic and cultural domains. So political, economic, and cultural domains. I would say political, economic, and cultural domains is exactly where the EU rules, wouldn't you say? I don't know. It just goes on and on. There's just so many things here about the Nazis and the Axis and how it was on the plan, and they actually called it a new order. So that's the origins of the New World Order and the New European Order. And then at the very end, like the 2/3 in, it says the Third Rome. We won the Cold War together. It is seldom realized that the plan to integrate the states of Western Europe around a single currency, grandiose though it is only part of an even larger plan. European integration is not an exclusively Western European affair. Indeed, the very purpose of suggesting the institutional restructuring of Western Europe around a hard core, according to the plan's German authors, is to permit the creation of a common Western European foreign and security policy, which will in turn be based on a lasting partnership with Russia. The German government has repeatedly stressed that it is the advocate of pan-European, not just Western European. And then it goes on and says eventually it will go into the international community. So the plan was to go Western Europe, then join Russia, then the international community. And I guess they're pissed at Putin because he's not going along with it. I don't know. But I'm just saying, this might be a good read. So those are some quotes from this. I've never actually done a book other than Do What We Are with Jordan Peterson on the air. And I wanted to get dressed up because I think it's that important. Because this proves my thesis. This proves my thesis. It talks about it all. And so the UN borders and everything. He talks about everything, even currency and inflation, and how the banking system let go of its attachment to gold. Everything. It explains why the European Union removes people, the World Bank removes people as soon as they say they want to change their currency back in the European Union. This explains all of that. It explains why they freaked out so much when Mike Pompeo actually made a speech just on January 8th, I found out, and I'll try and link it here if I have time or down below. But it was a huge speech where he said there is a world order, there is an international order, and it does not honor its citizens. It does not serve its citizens. And we want to restore democracy so that we can actually serve our citizens and respect human rights. Isn't that interesting? That's everything this talks about. I was so impressed with that speech. I highly recommend you see it. And of course, they freaked out about it. They were like, you know, the Trump administration downgrades the EU without warning Brussels. You darn right. You know, Brussels is the World Bank buying out. I found out what they're doing in Sweden, and they're now using Sweden's CEOs to go into Jordan, and then they take those CEOs to go into Africa. And now I just published what they're doing in Ghana. They have the president of Ghana saying everyone in the country, all the CEOs should get behind the SDGs. But none of the CEOs understand that the global warming tactic is just an anti-capitalist tactic, which means it's anti-profit. It means no one deserves profit. And let me be very clear about what capitalism is. Capitalism is a customer's right to free choice. That's what capitalism is. And that talks about that in here. Capitalism means the customers have the right to choose instead of the state saying, we're going to choose your bread, we're going to choose where you buy it, instead of going to a commissary where you have to go to this commissary and you get one person and they choose what food you eat and they choose who you're going to buy it from, and there's going to be one place and they control it all. No. Capitalism is free choice, competition, and the customers are always right. Do you remember that phrase? The customers are always right? Always right? That's capitalism. Capitalism is customer focused. And I just did a posting on how TwitchCon happened, and people didn't understand what the heck was going on at TwitchCon. They were like, I don't get the jokes. This is a terrible event. And I was like, yeah, I understand what happened at TwitchCon now. It was this gaming event. And if they had actually gotten the gamers what they wanted, they know what the gamers want. It's a streaming device for streaming, it's streaming content. It's a site for streaming content. It's kind of like the YouTube for gamers. They know exactly what those gamers want. They had a big convention. They know exactly what those gamers want. They know exactly what those gamers need. They know exactly who they love. They could so easily just say, okay, here are all the top players, see who we can hire, get them on a panel, and then they get these instead. No, that's not what they do. They hire by the SDGs. They hire by these climate change goals, all 17 of them. And so they had all these women up there, women that dressed like they were going to Walmart, women who hated men, because of course, if you're going to have a lot of men in the audience, you have to have an equal representation of women. So they put women up there with the mic who didn't know anything about gaming, who didn't care about gaming, who were giving out awards, who didn't know anything. They didn't even have, they just looked terrible. They weren't excited. You could tell that they had made, it was women's empowerment, right? Because that's one of the sustainable development goals, is women's empowerment. So they didn't give the customers what they wanted. And of course, they had every rainbow of color, because if they had given what the customers had wanted, the panels would have been all men, and it would have been pretty much white guys and Asian guys, you know, with some other guys mixed in between. But that's not who they had at all, not even close. And so the event didn't make sense. They were too busy trying to make the PC gods happy. Well, the PC gods are anti-profit. And so what they had to do, they had to backfill things. They had people doing the dance that didn't know anything about the dance. They had to backfill the seats to make it look like people were attending the convention when they were actually leaving. Like, they're like, we're out of here. This is crap. Do you think that event's going to go ahead and expand next year? Do you think more ticket sales are going to go out? Do you think people watched online and were like, oh my gosh, I totally missed out. I wish I'd been there and seen this person in person. Like, oh my gosh, why didn't I go? I need to get a ticket next year and they could up sales next year. People think capitalism, because the left says it, people think capitalism is all about profit. No, you only make profit if you make your customers happy. Capitalism is all about serving the customer and the customer's needs. And when you do the Sustainable Development Goals, you are absolutely fulfilling the UN's needs. They give you a formula and they're like, here's what you take. And then the customers go and they go, wow, you really don't care about what I want. You actually don't know me at all. And then they don't trust the site. Then they're not happy. Then they do less. And then they get bitter. And then it just goes wrong and things go sideways. And what do you know? TwitchCon doesn't make as much, or they lose money, and the CEOs go upside, or they lose their jobs, as we've seen. Every time a CEO does something in the gaming community for the SDGs and they say, oh, my kid chose this or this, they always have a thing like that of like, my children said we should do this. That's just a line, right? No child says, oh, please follow this climate change development goals at the age of 6. So yeah, they go right along, boom, 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 like in every single industry. Isn't that interesting? You just can't question it if a kid says it, right? So they go ahead and they say all these things, and then all the customers revolt because it's not a choice they asked for or they wanted. It didn't meet their needs. And what happens? That CEO goes under. They get fired. And I'm just like, it's an anti-capitalist, anti-profit, anti-customer service regime. Socialism doesn't make the customers happy. Socialism makes the 1% happy because now they have less competition. And lo and behold, the people who are behind it, they'll be the only ones left standing. Just like Google is the only search engine left standing. They don't have any competition. Of course not. You know, so you have to take whatever Google gives you. All the other search engines are gone. So just remember that capitalism, and it's all right here. And democracy and having our own form of money is so important. And so EU, you have a lot to do, but it's worth fighting to get your own money going again, to get your own financial system going again. But whatever you do, everyone needs to read this and learn about the history of the Nazis. Because I know when I was in school, I was taught a lot about the Nazis, not this stuff, but I was taught, like, certainly not the socialism side. I was taught about the Holocaust. But I was not taught anything about Lenin, and I was not taught anything about Mussolini. I remember Mussolini was literally a paragraph and a half in my history book. And I was like, I've heard a lot about this guy. Why is there a paragraph and a half in my entire history book? I remember being really, really confused about that. I actually remember it logging in my head. And now I know why. They didn't want us to know any of this, because we would have seen the European Union coming, and we would have said no to it. It's time to read up. All right, I love you guys so much. I hope that you see how much I care about this and how much I really mean by this, by the dressing up and everything. It's pretty late at night, but I was just starting. I couldn't stop. I was to get too many quotes for you, and I was like, that's it. I can't write all this out again. I was like, I'm going to have to, oh my gosh. Central bank independence even talks about the world. Central bank independence, a trap. Yeah, and Mike Pompeo talked about that. Every time I turn to a page, I'm like, another thing I need to, like, we've talked about here on my channel, I've talked about on Twitter, everything from the World Bank. Mike Pompeo talked a lot about the World Bank, what the World Bank was set up for and what it's actually doing. It's actually undermining private businesses around the world. So never ever take a loan with the World Bank. They will undermine your business. They will undermine it and take you out. So, and that's not what it was set up for. So that, of course, Nazis, they lie. Fascists, they lie. So there you go. Love you guys so much. I hope that helps in your fight for independence and freedom. Peace out. Bye. And thank you for your kind thoughts and love and prayers and meditations that you sent the other night. They really made a huge, huge difference. That was really hard to share that stuff, but you guys were amazing, and you made me grateful that I did it, and I can't thank you enough for that. And I am also sending out all my love to those of you who are going through the same thing I am. And on that note, I better go rest. I love you. Bye. I guess if I have time, I'll do videos here. Sorry I can't be all fancy. I have to focus on resting so I can do the book for you.